So the first thing that I want to do with you guys, first thing I want to do is I want to be honest with you, because honesty is an important part of storytelling. And well, in all honesty, if I was to meet with a psychologist today, I'd probably be diagnosed with something. I'd probably be diagnosed with more than one thing. And the psychologist would probably prescribe me some sort of medication, and I'd look at that medication and think, I don't know about this. Because in all honesty, I'm not sure that I want to mess with my ability to make poor decisions. Now, do I regret some of my decisions in life? Absolutely. But occasionally, a poor decision can lead to a great adventure. And there is nothing better than a great adventure. Now, I've only met with one psychologist in my life. I mean, like a true PhD psychologist. It was during my sophomore year at Eastern Oregon University. It was after I'd gotten busted growing weed. This is back when weed was illegal. So I'd spent a night in jail. I'd found out that I was facing 2 to 4 years in prison. And then they let me out the next day as a low risk to run, first-time offender, college student. And well, since I'd made the front page of the local newspaper, obviously the university knew all about it, and my court date was set a couple of months in the future, innocent till proven guilty, so the university said that I could finish out the semester with the caveat that I met with the school psychologist. So a couple days after getting busted, I'm back in school, back taking classes, like nothing had happened. But I'd made some decisions, some important decisions about what I was going to do. And then I had the meeting with the school psychologist. I figured it couldn't hurt, someone to bounce my ideas off of. So in my allotted time, I showed up at Dr. Carter's office. I knocked on his door, he invited me in, and I sat down in the chair across from his desk. And I'm looking around the room, around his office, and there's pictures of rivers and him and his friends fishing, pictures of musicians. There's a guitar in the corner. And I'm thinking, this is my kind of guy. So we start things off lighthearted. We start talking about fishing, local rivers, our favorite spots. We're avoiding the real turmoil, the fact that I'm facing 2 to 4 years in prison. But eventually we get around to it and he says, so I've read you're in some serious trouble. Should we talk about it? I was like, yeah. And he's like, well, tell me what happened. So I tell him all about it. I tell him how I was studying in the library late one evening and I walked home to my apartment. I get to my apartment, my front door is slightly ajar. And there's a business card taped to my front door. Union County Police, Officer John Shaw, with the handwritten words on it, you need to call me ASAP. So I walk into my living room and all of my possessions are in this chaotic mound in the middle of the living room. So I walk into my bedroom, and obviously all the weed plants are gone, grow lights are gone, computer gone, and I'm just having a full-on panic attack. So I call my friend Chris, and Chris is like, hey, meet me at the school. So 15 minutes later, I meet Chris outside the school library, and I'm just freaking out. Freaking out. But Chris, he works his magic. He gets me to calm down, and the guy convinces me to turn myself in. See, Chris was from New Jersey. He was well versed in the arts of criminology. And I was thinking about running. And he's like, no. If you're going to run, don't run now. Run later. It's going to give you a lot more time. And he was right. So, with a lot of fear, shaking with fear, I walked down to the Union County Police Station and turned myself in. And as I'm telling Dr. Carter this, I can see that he's studying my body language and he keeps asking question after question. And the thing is, he's listening, so I just keep talking. I tell him how I walked into the Union County Police Station. I walk up to the front desk, walk up to the front clerk, and I'm like, yeah, Officer Shaw taped his business card to my front door. I believe that he probably wants to see me. So she makes a phone call, and a minute later, Officer Shaw appears, quite surprised that I'd turned myself in. He even said so himself. So he brings me into a room, he brings in another officer, and they start questioning me. And I'm trying to answer their questions with as little information as possible, trying not to incriminate myself. I don't know. And since that was going nowhere, they told me that I was being charged with 2 Class A felonies and a Class B felony, and that I'm facing 2 to 4 years in prison. And then they did the whole, give us 3 names. Give us 3 names of who you're selling to, or 3 names of anyone else selling drugs in this town. It's going to help with your sentencing. Play the whole rat game, play the rat game. But I knew better than to play the rat game. And since I was being tight-lipped, they're like, well, all right, we're just going to take you to jail then. So they stand me up, they march me down to the jail, and I get processed, fingerprinted, photographed, and I put on the jail uniform. And then they walk me down to my cell where I'd be sleeping for the night. And Dr. Carter, he stops me and he asks me, he's like, well, how did you feel at this point? What were you feeling? I was 19. This is my first time in jail. And I told him I was scared shitless. We were walking past the other jail cells, and one of the inmates, he's holding a tube of toothpaste, squeezed a little out, and he licks it while looking at me. I was scared shitless. I did not sleep that night. I did not sleep that night at all. I thought my cellmate was going to rape me. I'd watched too many movies. So, I was sitting there in my cell, I just kept thinking about the 2 to 4 years, not just in jail, but in prison. And that fear was just overwhelming. So I started considering my options. And Dr. Carter, he stops me and he asks me, he's like, what options are you considering? And I was a little hesitant to answer him, and I was like, it's like, you can't tell anyone what I say in this office, right? You can't tell the school administration or the police department, right? And he says to me, as long as you aren't planning on hurting yourself or anyone else. And he's like, are you planning on hurting yourself or anyone else? I was like, no, God, no. That's the last thing that I want to do. And he said, well, then what you say in here is safe. It's private. So I tell Dr. Carter about my whole plan. Day after I got out of jail, I'd written my friend. I had a good friend. He was spending the semester abroad teaching English down in Brazil in this little town of Bebedouro. So I'd written my friend and I wrote him, I was like, hey, how easy is it getting a job teaching English down there in Bebedouro? He's like, really easy. For an American, I can guarantee it 100%. So I told Dr. Carter that's what I was going to do, that I was going to run. And I was honest with him. I talked about my fears, my fear of what 2 to 4 years in prison would do to me. Because prison changes people, psychologically it changes people. And I was scared of that change. And Dr. Carter, he looks at me, he's like, your fears are valid. Prison does change people, and not often for the better. And Dr. Carter and I, we talked, and he asked question after question, and I was honest with him. We talked about what this choice would mean for me, about becoming a fugitive, about not being able to come back to the States, about not being able to see my family, versus, spending 2 to 4 years in prison. And we talked, and he asked question after question, and I answered them honestly. And the thing is, he was listening. He was truly listening. And I cannot tell you how good that felt to be listened to in that moment. That felt so good. And we talked. And at the end of our session, we stood up and we shook hands. And Dr. Carter, he looks at me and he says, I can tell that you've thought a lot about this with clarity, without any delusion. And your fears are valid. And if you decide to run, well, shoot me a line from Brazil. And those words just shocked me. They just shocked me, but in a good way. So I'm standing there shaking hands with them, and I was like, yeah, if I get a job teaching English down in Brazil, I'll definitely shoot you a line. And I walked out of that office excited. I was so excited, knowing that I wasn't making a completely irrational decision, that it was actually based in reality, doctor approved. And well, now I just needed to figure out how to get out of the country. Thanks.